Hello and welcome to Policy Watch, the show that gets you all the economic policy action of the week. Along with all the big news stories this week, we'll show you excerpts from an exclusive chat with the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, on the issue of direct transfer of subsidies. But before we get to that, let's take a look at this week's top headlines. The Prime Minister launches the direct subsidy transfer scheme system to be operational in 51 districts of the country by 1st Jan 2013. Outlook for India stable, good household savings rate and a competitive private sector bring India back in the game, says Moody's. The Supreme Court gives directive to the centre, says there should be a green levy on diesel cars. And the impasse over FDI ends. Parliament to discuss the issue. Markets a sigh of relief. Sensex crosses the 19,000 mark. Those are the headlines, and returning to the Policy Watch set this week is Dinesh Narayanan, Senior Editor of Forbes India magazine. It's good to have you back on the show, Dinesh. But before we get to Dinesh and his views on our major headlines, here is our top story of the week. The government's ambitious scheme of transferring subsidies to intended beneficiaries via direct cash transfer was rolled out by the Prime Minister on Monday. The Athar-linked system was flagged off by the Prime Minister after the pilot project in Alwar, Rajasthan showed positive results. Critics of the move have accused the government of using an untested, unproved system to garner votes. The fresh concerns come even as the two most critical links, Aadhaar numbers for all families and bank accounts, are not in place. The Unique Identification Authority of India has so far managed to meet the required criteria in 20 identified districts, while it has told the PMO that the remaining would be covered before January 2013. I caught up with the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, for a chat on the scheme, its pros, cons and criticisms. Here are some excerpts from that interview. Take a look.
Many oppose this particular scheme also because saying that in rural areas especially, recipients will struggle to spend the cash they receive because they could very well go off and spend it on country hooch or drugs for that matter even. These critics also say that rather than switch to cash, food rations could be delivered much better, as has started to happen in certain states. Now, Raman Singh is a BJP-ruled state of Chhattisgarh.
Let's stop here. The first point that, poor people don't know how to spend money and will spend it on drink. Whoever is saying this is falling into the trap of the Victorian upper classes in England, because that is what they used to say, that the poor will just spend their money on drink. I mean, the truth of the matter is, the logic of this would be that do not pay anybody minimum wages, give them sacks of grain. I mean, I just don't think that this makes any sense at all. It's a patronizing upper class bias. What I do believe, and that's very important, wherever an entitlement is there, it ought to be given to the woman in the household. Now, there's lots of sociological work that shows you that men who will spend their own wages on drink, and I think regrettably many of them do, will not actually grab the woman's money which is given to her in order to improve family health, family nutrition, etc., etc. So frankly, I think that, as long as you make sure that the money goes to the right person, I mean, the notion that it'll be hugely misspent is totally wrong.
Right.
And secondly, what is the difference between giving grain? I mean, if the men are that brutal, they'll just grab the grain and sell it. So this is a complete, in my view, completely unjustified fear.
And you think
it should be hit on the head.
That argument doesn't really stand. Point taken, sir, fair point. We're talking about Chhattisgarh and the claims by the Chief Minister in that particular state. Now, he claims that the state system is now transparent completely without the Aadhaar-linked based system. Food deliveries by lorry are tracked by modern GPS technology systems. Local councils, rather than privately run ration shops, oversee storage and distribution. The state government also claims that malnutrition and infant mortality are down as a result of these changes. Thoughts on this particular alternative, a better distribution and effective delivery through the old system? Can that really happen? If these states claim that they do not need the Aadhaar-based system, does that argument hold any water for you?
Well, let me say, I'm not in favor of forcing systems down people if they don't actually want it. I wouldn't like to say that an alternative system cannot be perfect. What I am saying is that the probability of misuse in the Aadhaar system is minimized massively.
The biggest problem or the biggest roadblock or obstacle in the Aadhaar link-based program is this, the issue of proof of address. Now, the RBI notification and the clarification says that the banks must continue to get proof of current address. Also, cash transfer is dependent on access to a bank account. They need proof of address for that. Now, the poorest Indians, pavement dwellers, people who live on the streets, sleep on the road, they have no addresses to their name. Also, according to a survey, sir, not more than 18% of rural India, 28% of rural men, and a mere 6% of rural women have bank accounts. Now, explain to us how we can get over the issue of address proof for people like that with no residence addresses and residence proofs to their names.
No, let me say that, first of all, the percentage of people that have no residential address, in the sense that they live on the street, is actually not that huge.
It's a pretty substantial number.
Well, but I actually try and estimate it. I mean, you won't find that it's not 20%, it's not even 10%. When I say a lot of people will tell you where they live, and they're probably hugely crowded, etc. Technically, in my view, an Aadhaar number should be given to anyone, even if they don't have an address, in the sense that if it says under the third lamppost on the left of the legal cinema, you should give it to them. Because all that the Aadhaar number does, it enables you to say, this person has this fingerprint. That's all. And then if somebody else claims to be this person and doesn't have the fingerprint, he's out.
Montek Singh Ahluwalia, the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, I had a chat with him just a couple of days ago, defending stoutly that particular initiative rolled out by the Prime Minister and saying that even though Aadhaar-based direct subsidy transfer is a new and untested system, there is no reason for people to actually discount it just on the basis of that. We'll take a small break right now on Policy Watch. We'll come back with the other top stories of the week. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Policy Watch. There is some good news on the economic front for the government in a reversal of its earlier position. International ratings agency Moody's has said that the outlook on India's credit rating is now stable. Here's a report. Take a look. International ratings agency Moody's was one of the first agencies to sound the alarm on the risk of India's credit ratings being downgraded. In a dramatic turnaround, the same agency has now said that the outlook on India's rating is stable. Moody's said that the revised outlook was based on its structural strengths of a high household savings rate and a relatively competitive private sector. Even after a blitzkrieg of reform measures in September, most rating agencies had maintained that India faced a 1 in 3 chance of a credit downgrade in the next 2 years. Other ratings agencies like Standard & Poor's and Fitch have also kept India's rating on watch. The government has been saddled with renewed concern on the fiscal front after a fresh round of 2G spectrum auction could only fetch around 9,000 crore rupees. Tardy progress on the disinvestment front is also adding to the pressure on the government coffers. The finance minister has now revised the deficit target to 5.3% of the GDP from 5.1%, but most experts feel it is likely to be closer to 5.6%. For the time being, though, the positive signals by the Moody's statement will provide some cheer for industry and the markets. Bureau Report, RSTV. There you go. Dinesh, first up, this is a big relief for the markets, and couple this with the Goldman Sachs upgrade recently. The markets did have some cheer for that. Can one safely say now that the risk to India's credit rating has gone down considerably now?
I don't think it has gone down substantially. Of course, the government has managed to probably push it back a little bit, but the risks still remain, and I think Moody's has pointed out that one of the reasons why one of the risks which remains is the high private sector borrowing. So I think that is one issue which still remains, or rather at the back of their minds.
Right. There's also a cautionary note in the Moody's report. The rating is constrained, Moody's says, by the credit challenges posed by India's poor social and physical infrastructure, low per capita income and high government deficit and debit ratio. Thoughts on that? How important is it for the government to actually concentrate on that now?
It is very important because if you look at the past year, the government has been borrowing heavily from the market. It's been crowding out other borrowers from the market, and one of the reasons for that is the high spending, high deficits and the high social sector spending. Now, you cannot cut down significantly on the social sector spending in India, you know that. So the other, what you could do probably is to reduce the fiscal deficit. That is the only way out for the government. And there you have not seen much from the government side so far.
Right.
So that means that the private sector borrowers will continue to be crowded from the market. And add to that the deposit growth has not been very good this year, last year. Rather.
Also, the government's efforts at reducing the fiscal deficit, divestment hasn't really taken off as they had hoped to. They've cleared a couple of projects. HAL is one, HCL is one, I think NTPC also. But couple that with the, well, I wouldn't call it a poor response, but less than expected response to the 2G, fresh 2G auctions. The government's in dire straits on that front.
But always remember that these are asset sales. So these are all one-time, revenues for you.
Windfalls.
Yeah, these are windfalls. I mean, you cannot keep selling your family silver all the time.
Right, right.
Yeah, there won't be any silver left to sell. So these are all stopgap measures, and even those have not done very well. So going forward, you need to have a sustainable plan to reduce your fiscal deficit. The finance minister has said that that the deficit would be reduced, and he has also given some targets. But I'm very doubtful about achieving those targets.
And he's revised those targets a couple of times in the middle. Moody's also expects the strong household savings. They're very gung-ho about the household savings rate, and the competitive private sector will ultimately raise the GDP growth rate from around 5.4% in 2012-13 to 6% or higher in 2013-14. Do you think that's a rather optimistic outlook?
I think it is. I think it is an optimistic outlook. Yes, household savings, I mean, they are considering the household, but look at the deposit growth. Deposit growth has been slowing. And one of the biggest channels of money flowing into productive investments is through bank deposits, and which is not happening as much as it should be happening.
So can one say that this Moody's revision is just a flash in the pan? The other two top rating agencies, S&P, Standard & Poor's, as well as Fitch, their outlook on India is still negative.
I don't know if it is a flash in the pan. I mean, I don't know if that's what you want to term it. But yes, I mean, this is probably a short-term, and they've always said that they will be watching the performance of the economy and how these various parameters pan out over the next few months. And these things could change.
Right.
These things could change quite rapidly, actually.
That's right. Let's also tell our viewers that India's economic growth fell in the second quarter. The GDP numbers for the second quarter are out, and if my figures are correct, it's 5.3% as compared to 5.5% in the first quarter. Let's get in a couple of questions on that particular issue as well. Dinesh, it is a fall. It is a slight fall, but it's not a big fall. It's 0.2%, but it's still a fall, and that also must be worrying for the government.
It should certainly worry the government, and if you look at it, the agriculture growth has fallen in that, which is one of the key, one of the things which the government is trying to revive, and that is also has fallen. And we've seen industrial growth slowing down considerably over the past few months.
I think the manufacturing sector also has shown weakness in the second quarter. That is something the government has been hammering on. They've been saying that they need to revive the manufacturing sector, but steps haven't really worked. Why do you think the manufacturing sector, which used to be the shining star of India's GDP growth, has considerably fallen in the past, I think, 2 quarters now?
One of the significant things is demand has been slowing in the economy. And see, demand slows when people, people's expectations of income also slows. So at the level where the spending has come in the past few years, probably the incomes are not growing as fast as they should be growing, or people's expectations are of incomes, which is also slowing down demand.
Right.
So that's affecting the manufacturing sector.
Policy inertia is something that people blame for the manufacturing sector, as well as the whole GDP growth becoming slow. But even in mid-September, when that flurry of reforms took place, we're not seeing the effect, the desired effect of those reforms. So do you think it'll take a little more while before those reforms start to kick in?
I think there is quite a lot of skepticism about the government's ability to actually transform these reforms from paper to action.
Implementation is the problem.
Absolutely.
And that's,
so I think that's where a lot of industrialists have their doubts, and that's probably one of the reasons why the investments are, plus along with that, the reduction in demand is also playing a role in investments not happening on the ground.
Right.
Plus the other issues which have been there, like land acquisition, other bottlenecks in investments, those still remain. They've not been cleared yet.
One last question on the fiscal deficit. I mentioned before the finance minister has revised his targets, and he thinks it's going to be around 5.1 to 5.3%. But experts and most economists suggest that it could go up above than 5.6%. Where do you think the fiscal deficit is heading? What is a realistic number to aim at?
I can't say what a realistic number could be, but even if the government manages to reduce it by about, bring it closer to about 5% from the current levels, even that would give some amount of confidence to the players in the economy, simply because they know that the measures which the government is taking is at least having an effect on the fiscal deficit, but those are not happening yet.
Right. I mentioned that I had a chat with Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, the Deputy Chairman of Planning Commission. He also mentioned before the interview, or somewhere in the interview, that it is going to get worse before it starts to get better. Do you think that's exactly what's happening right now? This is the low phase, and perhaps we could go on a higher trajectory?
One of the key things which have kind of hobbled the Indian economy and in general the country has been the political scenario. Now, that doesn't seem to be clearing out anytime soon. And if we are going into an election year in 2013, which is a strong possibility, then all these calculations are going to go awry. So, a prolonged political instability is going to affect policy anyway.
Right.
Which is going to again, show in your GDP numbers, in your growth, in your investment, everything.
I think the writing's on the wall there. We'll take a short break on that note. We'll come back with a third story of this week on Policy Watch. Don't go anywhere. Keep watching. Welcome back to Policy Watch, our third story this week. Now, the Supreme Court on Monday sent a notice to the central government asking it to levy an annual environment compensation charge on existing private cars in the National Capital Region, NCR, due to rising air pollution. The SC order came after senior advocate Harish Salve filed an application that also seeks to impose a similar charge on new private diesel cars to be paid to dealers at the time of purchase. The application pleaded that a fee of 25% of the cost be levied on every new diesel vehicle which causes more pollution. The application also sought levying a 2% fee on the cost of all existing petrol cars and 4% of the cost of all existing diesel cars. Now, Dinesh, I did a show the other day, and the NGO, the organization that actually filed the PIL, their Director General was on the panel as well, and there were some people from the auto industry as well. They had a go at each other, saying that this PIL doesn't have any ground, and this is a skewed logic. This is the right kind of medicine for the wrong kind of disease. This is the auto industry's logic. Hear me out now. High subsidies on diesel are busting the budget. Fixing the problem means deregulating diesel prices and reducing the cost gap between petrol and diesel. They also say, the industry also says that they're trying to solve the problem by increasing the price gap between diesel and petrol cars is not the solution. It will skew the market for automobiles. Do you agree, Dinesh, with the theory that says that raising diesel prices is a much better remedy than taxing diesel cars some more?
Certainly that is. Because one of the major things which has happened in the Indian economy is the administered prices of fuel. Now, that is obviously not a market-determined price, and which has its domino effect on the rest of the economy anyway, and the government finances. But that apart, are we approaching this issue, the diesel issue, from a pollution point of view, or are you approaching it from a subsidy point of view?
That's the question, isn't it? That's the question, isn't it? And that's the big debate. Should we approach it as an environmental issue? Because there is an environmental argument here. And On the other hand, there is the auto industry, and they talk only profits and industry. So what is there a middle path that one can approach it from? Is there a middle path? Is there a middle solution where the auto industry doesn't really suffer that much and we can breathe easy?
No, certainly, because world over there has been a movement against private transport, and there is, especially in modern cities, they are trying to remove as much as private transport as possible and introduce more and more efficient public transport. And public transport any day is more efficient. You know,
right.
A bus can carry a much larger number of people than a car can.
And most buses and public transport in the NCR region is almost everything is on CNG now.
Yes. And another issue there is that, I mean, if you look at Delhi, a transport expert once told me that, you know, in Delhi, the private transport usage is about by the 12% of population. So 12% of population in Delhi uses private transport, and that's all you see on Delhi roads, cars. Right. Most of them are cars. And most of them have one person or two person traveling in it. So are you looking at it from an efficiency and pollution point of view? Are you looking at it from a subsidy point of view? Now, these days, there are a lot of engines available which are highly fuel efficient and very low polluting engines, like European 5 standards. So all the manufacturers have that. It's not as if they don't have it. And they can easily introduce them. And diesel is actually a less polluting fuel compared to petrol.
Right.
And it's a more efficient engine. So you have to look at it where you're approaching the problem from.
Right. If this directive is implemented, suppose it is implemented, the centre has to implement it, won't that increase consumption of petrol as people will naturally start switching to petrol cars? Because otherwise they'll have to pay 25% levy on green levy on diesel cars. That is not good for us. Already India is highly over-dependent on oil imports. That wouldn't be good for us, would it?
Before that question, there's another question also, actually. Whether the Supreme Court can give a directive to the government on what tax should be fixed. Should there be 25%? I think it's a policy issue. It will probably go back to, again, the question of whether the government, whether the powers lie with the government or with the court.
Or the court, right.
I think that issue might come up.
Right.
Because the court doesn't have the powers to fix taxes.
Right.
It is the government which has the powers.
Ultimately, it's the government that has to fix taxes.
So it's a policy decision. So the court can give a directive to have a certain policy.
Right.
Maybe. But I don't know. I'm not an expert on that. But this particular issue might come up.
Dinesh, I want to buy a diesel car. I'm tired of running around in autos and buses. Should I buy it now before something happens?
Maybe you should buy a smaller diesel car.
All right, Dinesh, on that note, we'll end our program. Of course, that was Dinesh Narayanan, Senior Editor of Forbes India Magazine. Thank you so much for joining us on Policy Watch this week. Our top story this week on Policy Watch, we had a chat with Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission. He stoutly defended the Aadhaar-based, Aadhaar-linked direct cash transfer subsidies, direct transfer subsidies to intended beneficiaries, of course, saying that just because a system is new and it's path-breaking does not mean it should be discounted, no matter what leakages or loopholes need to be plugged right now. Our second story this week on Policy Watch, Moody's, the international ratings agency, has come back, revised its position and said that outlook on India's credit rating is stable, even though the other two big ones, Fitch and S&P, still have that outlook as negative. My guests seem to think that this particular weakness right now, we have to see our household investment saving rate is pretty good, but there are other issues that the government needs to address, especially the fiscal deficit, the ballooning fiscal deficit. And that's our second story this week. The third story, of course, the Supreme Court has given a directive to the centre saying there should be a green levy on diesel cars. Now, rightly, my guest today said the question is, of course, are we looking at it from an environmental perspective or are we looking at it from a subsidy perspective? We have to decide what road are we going to take. Till then, of course, the directive has gone to the centre. We'll have to wait and watch what the centre does about it. That's all the time we have on Policy Watch this week. Athar saying goodbye, good night, and thank you for watching.